Nestled in the heart of a dense ancient forest lay the shimmering waters of Lake Arundel. The lake was a thing of beauty, its surface mirroring the towering pines that surrounded it. Yet there was an air of unease that clung to the area like a mist. Locals whispered tales of strange occurrences, of people who ventured too close to the lake's edge and were never seen again. I came to Arundel in search of a quiet escape. The chaos of city life had become unbearable, and the idea of spending a week by the lake surrounded by nature seemed like the perfect remedy. I rented a small cabin on the shore, a quaint structure with peeling paint and creaking floorboards. The owner, an elderly woman named Martha, handed me the keys with a warning. "Stay away from the lake after dark," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I chuckled nervously. "Why's that?" Her pale blue eyes met mine, and there was something almost pleading in her gaze. "There's something in the water, something that doesn't belong." I dismissed her words as the ramblings of an old woman and assured her I'd be careful. But as I settled into the cabin, unpacking my belongings and soaking in the tranquility of the forest, her warning lingered in the back of my mind. The first day passed uneventfully. I spent the afternoon hiking through the woods and the evening sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the lake. The colors reflected on the water were mesmerizing, shifting from gold to crimson to deep purple as the daylight faded. But as night fell, a strange sensation washed over me. The lake, which had seemed so inviting during the day, now appeared ominous. The water was ink black, its surface disturbingly still. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, though the forest was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. The next morning, I decided to explore the lake up close. I borrowed an old rowboat from the cabin shed, its wooden oars worn smooth from years of use. As I paddled out into the water, I was struck by how clear it was. I could see straight to the bottom, where smooth stones and patches of aquatic plants lay undisturbed. About halfway across the lake, something caught my eye, a faint shimmer beneath the surface. It was almost like sunlight reflecting off metal, but it seemed to move, twisting and shifting as though alive. I leaned over the edge of the boat, trying to get a better look, and for a moment I thought I saw a face. It was pale and ghostly, with eyes that glowed faintly in the depths. Startled, I pulled back, the boat rocking dangerously as I lost my balance. The shimmer vanished, and I told myself it was just a trick of the light. That evening, I met a local fisherman named Daniel at the small general store in town. He was a rugged man in his 40s, with weathered skin and a quiet demeanor. When I mentioned the lake, his expression darkened. "You shouldn't be out there alone," he said, his voice low. "Why not?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "There's a legend about that lake," he said finally. "They say it's cursed, that something lives in the water, something that pulls people under." I laughed nervously. "You don't actually believe that, do you?" Daniel's face remained serious. "I've seen things," he said. "Ripples in the water when there's no wind, shadows that move against the current, and once I heard a voice." His words sent a chill down my spine. I didn't believe in curses or monsters, but there was something about the way he spoke that made me uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep. The lake seemed to call to me, its inky surface glowing faintly under the light of the full moon. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside, determined to uncover the truth. The air was cold as I stepped outside the cabin, the sharp scent of pine filling my lungs. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale light across the land. The stillness of the forest was unsettling, with no chirps of crickets or calls of nocturnal creatures. It felt as though the world was holding its breath. I made my way down the path leading to the lake, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The lake's edge was eerily quiet, the water reflecting the moonlight like a dark mirror. My footsteps were muffled by the soft earth, and I paused for a moment to listen, but heard nothing except the faint rustle of leaves. My curiosity pushed me forward. As I reached the water's edge, I crouched down and peered into the black depths. The reflection of the trees shivered on the surface, their branches swaying gently in the wind. But there was something else, something moving beneath the water, faint ripples spreading in strange patterns that made no sense. The sensation of being watched crept over me again, stronger than before. I scanned the lake, but the source of the ripples was elusive. There was no breeze to cause such movement. Just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. A soft, melodic voice, barely a whisper, seemed to rise from the depths. "Help me!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the sound of my own breathing. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the wind or some trick of the mind. But then it came again, clearer this time. "Help me, please." I stumbled back, my foot catching on a rock. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment the beam illuminated something beneath the water. Two glowing eyes, faint and indistinct, but unmistakably there. They stared at me with an intensity that chilled me to my core. I backed away from the water, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. My mind raced. What was it? A trick of the light? A figment of my imagination? I had to know. I had to see. Without thinking, I grabbed the rope tied to a nearby dock post and pulled myself into the rowboat. The wooden hull creaked under my weight as I slowly pushed off from the shore. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't resist the pull of the unknown, the desire to uncover the truth. I rowed out, the boat gliding smoothly over the water. The ripples had stopped, but the air around me felt thick, as though the lake itself was holding its breath. The silence was suffocating. The further I went, the darker the water became, until the bottom was no longer visible. I was in the center of the lake now, and the air felt strangely colder. And then I saw it beneath the surface, glowing faintly, an enormous shape moving in the depths. It was as if the water had parted for a moment, revealing a dark, twisted form, undulating like a serpent. My heart skipped a beat. It was too large to be any kind of fish or creature I had ever seen. It was ancient, its movements fluid and deliberate. I was mesmerized, staring at it in awe and terror. The shape suddenly shot toward the surface, breaking the water with a violent splash. I screamed and scrambled to row back to shore, but the boat lurched violently to one side. The water around me began to swirl, pulling at the boat with unnatural force. I felt a cold, wet hand grip my ankle, and I gasped as a shadowy figure rose from the depths, its pale face twisted in anguish. Its eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to suck in the light. "Help me," it whispered, its voice like 1,000 tortured souls. I flung the oars into the water, pushing myself away from the lake's grasp, but the figure followed, crawling across the surface of the water toward me. Desperation surged through me as I rowed faster, my heart hammering in my chest. With every stroke, the shadow seemed to grow closer, its form shifting and writhing. I could feel the weight of its presence, like a suffocating pressure, and I thought I was going to drown. My mind screamed for me to turn around and look, to face the horror, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see it again. I finally reached the shore, the boat crashing against the bank as I jumped out and ran, not stopping until I was back at the cabin. My legs were weak, my heart still racing in fear. I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, gasping for breath. The lake outside was silent now, its waters still once again. But I knew that the thing in the depths was still watching, waiting for its next victim. The night passed in a restless haze. My thoughts were muddled, my heart still pounding from the terror I had experienced on the lake. I lay awake in the small cabin, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. Was it real? Had I really seen that creature, or was it just a figment of my imagination warped by fear? But I knew deep down that it wasn't a dream. The thing I had seen in the water was real. There was something dark beneath the surface, something ancient and powerful. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. As dawn broke, a gray light filtered through the cabin's windows, but I felt no comfort in it. The peaceful sounds of morning seemed far away, drowned out by the memory of the shadow in the lake. I couldn't leave. I had to know more. I had to understand what was happening here. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Daniel the fisherman had known something. His warnings had been clear, but I hadn't taken them seriously. I had dismissed the stories, chalking them up to superstition and old legends. But now everything had changed. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I made my way to the town's small library, hoping to find some answers. The building was old, with dusty shelves lined with weathered books. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, greeted me with a nod. When I mentioned the lake, her expression changed, though she remained silent for a moment. "You're not the first to come asking about the lake," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "There are stories here, old stories passed down through generations. Some people come and they never leave. Others, they come back, but they're never the same." I asked her if she had any books on the history of the lake. She led me to a corner of the library where a dusty tome sat on a shelf. It was a thick, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. She opened it to a chapter titled The Curse of Lake Arendor. "The story goes back centuries," the librarian began, her voice quiet but steady. "Long ago, there was a village by the lake. The people lived peacefully, but they angered an ancient being that dwelled beneath the water. It was a spirit, a guardian of the lake, who had been there since time immemorial. When the villagers tried to take too much from the land, the spirit retaliated." As she spoke, I felt a chill creep up my spine. This was no ordinary legend. This was a warning. The spirit cursed the village, condemning it to disappear into the depths of the lake for 10 years at a time. Every decade, the village would reappear, but only for one day, and anyone who stayed past sunrise would be lost forever. They'd become part of the lake, bound to it for eternity. I closed the book slowly, a sense of dread filling me. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The voice in the water, the figure that had reached out to me, it was all connected. The spirit was real, and the curse had not been broken. It had simply been waiting for the right moment. The librarian's voice interrupted my thoughts. "You must be careful," she said, her gaze serious. "If you go back to the lake, be sure you leave before morning. There are things in that water that will never let you go." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had learned. I knew I couldn't leave Arendor without one final confrontation. The shadow in the water had found me once, and I wasn't about to let it pull me under without a fight. That evening, I returned to the lake, determined to end this. The air was thick with tension, and the surface of the water gleamed under the light of the setting sun. I stood at the water's edge, the same place where I had felt the eyes of the creature upon me. This time, though, I wasn't afraid. As I stared into the dark depths, the shadow reappeared just as it had before. It rose from the water, its glowing eyes burning into mine. But this time, I wasn't running. This time, I faced it. "Leave this place," I shouted, my voice shaking but resolute. "I won't be your prisoner. You won't have me." The shadow paused, as if considering my words. Then, slowly, it receded back into the depths, its form dissolving into the water. The ripples faded, and the lake became still once more. I had broken the curse. As I turned to leave, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the lake. The dark presence had vanished, and the curse was finally broken. The village that had once been lost beneath the waves was now free to rest in peace. But as I walked away, I could still hear the faintest whisper, carried by the wind. Thank you. And with that, I knew that Lake Arrendore had shared its story with me, and I would carry it with me forever. The shadow beneath the lake had been banished, but the memories of the cursed village and its tragic fate would remain with me for the rest of my days.